the prosecuting attorney for the County of Jackson, Jarzynka. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Bart. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. And we both wore red ties today.
You know, I appreciate that. I'm very honored, Bart, that you're doing the red tie today. So
now you must have many.
I do have a number of red ties, but you might be interested to note that I do have some blue ties too.
Oh my gosh.
So I do have some variety there.
Nice that you mix it up from time to time.
Yes, it is.
So the prosecutor's office has been very busy. So today we're going to catch up on a few things happening that have been in court, but also a couple of things we'll talk about general and in policing and some of the issues around the country and locally. But first, let's catch up on the Frankie Ackley jury verdict. That happened a couple of years ago, right?
Actually, Bart, it was almost 3 years ago. It happened beginning of COVID, 2020. So one of the things we've been tasked to do is work on the trial log or trial backlog of cases. Because of COVID, pushed a lot of cases back. So this was one of them. It actually happened in March of 2020. Finally went to trial here in January. Got a verdict on January 17th. So Frankie Ackley was convicted of second-degree murder and felony firearm, in the killing of James Cooper Robertson. This was a case that happened outside of Duffy's Bar. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning on March 6th of 2020, and this was not a gang violence-related homicide. This was more of a traditional motive where two young men had the interest of the same woman. And so one thing led to another. It was their confrontation outside of Duffy's Bar. Our theory of the case was that the defendant, Frankie Ackley, was jealous because his former girlfriend was dating the victim, James Cooper Robertson, and knew that the victim was going to be present in the bar that night. And actually, surveillance video cameras showed him arriving and really looking around and actually going outside the bar, looking for an opportunity to confront him. At the trial, it was interesting that the defendant, claimed self-defense because in the surveillance video outside the bar that captured a part of the event, the victim had a cell phone in the hand. And so obviously, the law of self-defense, we've done a number of police officers involved in shootings, is that if a person reasonably believes or perceives that their life is in danger of serious harm or death, they are justified in using deadly force to defend themselves, even if later on it's found to be mistaken. So that was a legitimate claim that the jury had to first overcome and decide if the prosecutor had met the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt it was not self-defense, and then they could consider whether or not the elements of murder were satisfied by what was presented at trial, and they were. So we're pleased with the verdict. Very thankful to the jury. It's tough because this is a case that went over a week. So you've got jurors that they're taken out of their normal life, the routine, and then they're thrown into this environment. And then for a whole week they're involved. Then it went past the weekend. They have to come back and deliberate. And plus, in this case, it's the most serious charge, murder. So you're not. The prosecution and defense cannot tell the jury what the penalty is for the crime. But obviously, most people who serve in the jury know that if they do convict, that person's going to go to prison for a long time. So I think juries here in Jackson County they've been great, but they take their duty very seriously. So I'm grateful. I think they did a great job here.
Do you approach a case differently when you have a jury versus a bench trial?
You do, yes. A jury trial is just so much enormous time and preparation that goes into that. You're presenting the case to a group of people who they don't know anything about the case. And typically they're not familiar with the different types of legal requirements involved with how you look at evidence.
It might be their first time in a courtroom.
Yes, it could be. And so it's much different than TV or the movies. It's very specific rules about what can be admitted into evidence, what can't, what questions can be asked, what can't. And there's different breaks during the trial. because the jury sometimes is excused because the attorneys are going to argue about a point of law or point of evidence, and maybe that evidence is not admitted, and so the jury can't hear that because it can influence their decision. So it's quite a dynamic experience. So it's really something that if you ever serve on a jury, I think you'll never forget.
And that's a good point. So a jury can't hear certain information, but the judge can't help but hear that information.
Yes, and the difference in a bench trial is that, the judge decides everything, and the judge has experience having heard cases before, so it's a big difference. So you don't have to educate the judge about the law or evidence or rules of evidence like you do in a jury. So it's a much different approach, and you spend less time, with that preparation in a bench trial.
One nice thing that we've seen in the last few years, the prosecutor's office and local law enforcement have been pretty successful in some cold cases. You've been able to get some prosecutions in some cold cases, including murder that goes back to, I think, 2009.
Yes, we just had a sentencing happen recently. The defendant was Tiffany Reichert. She was an accomplice or co-defendant along with Michael Beatty. This refers back to the Matthew Crampton homicide from 2009. It was a cold case that for a number of years went unsolved until finally it was tracked down to Michael Beatty. He did confess to the actual first-degree murder, which is the penalty of life without parole. And then it was found out that he did have an accomplice, but a very young person, a 17-year-old Tiffany Reichert, who was with him but was not engaged in the actual stabbing of Matthew Crampton. This is an extremely violent homicide in which, in his own home, Michael Beatty had stabbed him over 90 times.
90 times.
Over 90 times. So it was pretty horrific crime. In this case, Judge Wilson sentenced Tiffany Reichert. She pled to a second-degree murder charge and took into account her age, and she was not the main participant in it, and sentenced her to 12 to 20 years in prison. So those cases are tough because, when a case gets older, it's tough to bring the evidence. You lose witnesses, the evidence gets older, that becomes more difficult to present as well.
Yeah, I always think about that when on the crime shows, they'll say, well, where were you on January 3rd? Well, I was with my mom, we did this and that. It's like, really? You to go back 12, 15 years, that's got to be hard, like just the establishment of alibi.
Yeah, and that's really a good point, Bart. That's why we've got a statute of limitations law, because you're right. If you are accused of committing a crime, it's hard to go back and defend yourself too, to look for evidence for your defense. There are exceptions, murder, first-degree rape. No statute. Those statute of limitations. So it's different in those cases, very, very serious. But for other crimes, there is a limitation period.
We're all, I think the whole country was sickened and saddened to see the beating that Tyree Nichols received at the hands of then police officers in Memphis. The difference, I think a lot of people noted between the George Floyd case and this case was how the police administration and the Memphis prosecutor acted that almost instantly.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I mean, this happened in the beginning of the first week of January, and then it took about 2 or 3 weeks. They did get charged. I think they did do their due diligence, but you're right. I think they're very transparent about what happened, about releasing the body cam videos. And when I looked at the videos that did get released publicly and did read about it. It's a tragic event. Certainly, I think the majority of police officers are out there, they're following the rules, they're doing their jobs, they're using force properly. In this case, look at the videos, it certainly looks like it was excessive. Look, I don't know all the investigation because I'm on the outside looking in, but certainly when you look at videos like that, that's pretty shocking, because here it's a case where it looks like they just literally beat someone up for fleeing a stop. When they were caught, they just were punching and beating that person until they were out. So I know locally, I've never seen our police do anything like that. Our local law enforcement have always followed their policies and rules about using force properly. In fact, when I've investigated, or not investigated, but reviewed police officer involved shootings, it's like our local officers really use tremendous restraint, almost too much restraint. You get to use deadly force to defend yourself. You don't have to wait to get shot to actually fire back. So here, locally, I'm very proud of our chiefs and our police officers, because they certainly have demonstrated over time that they follow the policies about use of force very well.
Yeah, I think you're right. We'd probably know about it because the use of video. Everyone's got a recording device on their body, and
well, I think in this case in Memphis, it'll be interesting to see what happens as the those criminal cases go forward. I suspect that probably this special unit they had in Memphis, the Scorpion unit, probably had other instances where they were excessively using force, and I'm sure that's going to be something that is probably going to come out in the months ahead in that case.
So I think a lot of people looked at this and thought, again, I can't believe it's happened again.
Well, I think a disappointing thing for me is that there were some segments of the media wanted to make this a racial thing, but when you look at the facts, all 5 officers in Memphis were all Black Americans. Mm-hmm. The chief there is a Black American, so this is certainly not something that was racial. This is really, it more focuses on police following policies, how to use force. I think that's the focus that should be on the case. Why did this happen on a traffic stop?
Yeah, and so I think the color blue more than black in this situation.
Yeah, and one of the other unfortunate consequences of this is that if you're a police officer doing your job in some other state or city or jurisdiction, people then look at this Memphis case and they can then judge you, well, you're like the officers there in Memphis, when you're not. So it makes their job really tough as it is now. That just makes it even more tougher.
Yeah, and I think that those in law enforcement that do the right thing, I know they were as sickened and saddened by this as everybody, all civilians.
Yes.
Now, I know we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but just today we had 911 calls, swatting. Someone called in, who knows from where, but at least 5 high schools, there were reports that there's active shooting going on, people have been shot. This is terrorism. That's a crime of terror.
Sure, there's different ways. If it's against a school, there is a school threat crime. It's a 10-year. But there's also something separate. You're right. Terrorism has nothing to do with schools, but if it's against what the statute says, a civilian population, to do some harm, yeah. So all of that's in play. That came to our office's attention this morning. First off, I'm glad it was a hoax, because we don't want a tragedy in our schools. But secondly, our office has always taken the position locally, if there's any type of a hoax with a school threat or a threat of a school shooting, we charge those cases, we prosecute those cases, and because they are serious. I think whether you're a teacher or a student or a member of that staff, you should be able to go to school every day and not have to worry about violence like that for any of us. That's just unacceptable. And so I know our local chiefs and officers are really very diligent. I know the response that happened this morning was excellent. I think that the superintendent, Jeff Beal, commented on that. So it's taken very seriously in our county. You always have to be vigilant on that, because you don't want to relax, because you could have a tragedy happen.
And I would imagine that law enforcement is going to go after whoever did this.
Yes.
Today.
Yeah, you can count there'll be an active investigation.
All right, one other thing, you've got a contract with DHHS, abuse and neglect contract, that's changing.
Yeah, there was an update that happened at the end of last year. You know, we had long held a position of representing Department of Health and Human Services on child neglect cases, child abuse neglect. And, you know, due to budget reasons, you know, with the county, you know, we needed to maintain some staffing levels. So we gave notice to end the contract at the end of last year. So beginning in January, you know, it freed up one assistant prosecutor and one legal secretary to work just on criminal cases. So we've got a total of, including myself, 11 prosecutors in the office. And so we didn't want to do that, but, you know, we needed additional help with our cases, especially with the, you know, trying to dive into a backlog from COVID. That's what happened. So what happened is that DHHS then went out and they retained a private attorney to represent them on those cases. So they're still going forward on that.
All right, so the case is still being prosecuted,
We are,
investigated?
yeah, and you know, and we take abuse and neglect very seriously of kids. You know, we do prosecute child abuse and child death homicide cases, so we're still doing those.
Great. Appreciate all the
Yeah,
updates.
you're welcome.
Jerry Jarzynka will be back tomorrow on the morning show with Mike Hurst from Andy's Angels. Great to see you, Jerry.
Bart, good to see you. Thank you.
Jackson County Prosecuting Attorney, Jerry Jarzynka. We've got